so pleased to have all of you here in person to share research insights in the format that we originally put together. What's especially encouraging today is that we've convened representatives from city, state, community, and education leaders and stakeholders who share similar interests in the challenging issues that we face with Utah's health and well-being. Before we get started, I'd like to express special appreciation to our sponsor, Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield of Utah, for their partnership on this series. I'd also like to recognize several special guests that we have with us here today. These include 2 USU trustees, Gina Gagan and J.C. Skinner, as well as several representatives in the state of Utah, including Mark Wheatley, Elizabeth Waite, Karen Kwan, and Sandra Hollins. Thank you all for being here. Additionally, representatives from cities include Tawny McKay from Riverton City Council, Stacy Hutchins from the Board of Education, and Chase Clyde from the Utah Education Association. Again, thank you for joining us today. As we consider the health and well-being of the children of Utah, most of us recognize that our adolescent school children are experiencing unprecedented social challenges. Bullying, in particular, creates social, mental, academic, and physical challenges that can have far-reaching social effects. Recent and prominent news stories show the tragedies that can stem from school-based isolation and bullying. Researchers, including today's presenter, Dr. Diana Meter, are working to provide understanding and solutions to the complex social challenges of school environments. When it comes to trying to understand how to address these problems, research can help. It can indicate the types of interventions that can make the biggest difference. Before we hear from Dr. Meter, we're happy to have Miguel Rivera, representative from Regents, who is their Director of Business and Community Relations, here with us today, and I'll ask him to come forward and make a few brief remarks. Miguel?
Thank you, Lisa. And I want to join Lisa in thanking everyone for being here, because it's been way too long away from this particular forum. Regents and Utah State University have been partners for about 16 years in this particular type of endeavor, where we're bringing the sort of key researchers on those issues to the forefront and bringing it so that all the community leaders and participants in these type of lunches, and they used to be breakfast, could hear and be aware of the important issues and what Utah State University is bringing in the form of research, which has practical impacts. This particular issue is a key issue because, as you have probably seen through the media, there are dramatic and sometimes tragic impacts that come from bullying. And Utah State University is committed to improving health and well-being, and as well as Regents, the provider, is also committed to the health and well-being, and we support not just Utah State University in their research, but our employers and members in being healthy. This research is critical because it's going to bring some awareness to the topic, but it'll also give us some guidance as to what some potential solutions might be. So I'm very intrigued and excited to hear Dr. Meter today. The research back in 2018, there was some data provided by the Utah State Board of Education that says that there's 1 out of 5 students is bullied. And that was before COVID and before some of these global issues that have actually increased a lot of stress for our students out there. So engage today, if you can, with Dr. Meter after she finishes her presentation, and also share the information that you learn here with the community, because I think as a community we have to make an effort collectively to resolve this issue. Thank you so much, and enjoy the presentation. Lisa, back to you.
Well, I'm now extremely pleased to turn over the time to our presenter. Dr. Diana Meter is an assistant professor in the Human Development and Family Studies Department at Utah State University. Dr. Meter earned her BA degree in psychology from the University of North Carolina at Asheville, and her MS and PhD degrees in family studies and human development from the University of Arizona, where she was funded by a prestigious National Science Foundation graduate fellowship. Prior to joining Utah State University, she worked as a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Texas at Dallas. Diana's primary research interest is peer relationships among children and adolescents. She teaches USU classes in research methods and human development. After the presentation, we're going to have considerable time for questions. And so, Diana, please come forward, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
I have a little bit of lingering bronchitis. Shouldn't be contagious, but just wanted to keep it safe. Anyway, I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about defenders, bullies, and victims, and the social ecology of adolescence, and maybe talk about some of these solutions that can be used to prevent peer victimization from happening, and if it does happen, how to buffer some of those ill effects. So my goal is for you by the end of today to sort of understand a little bit more about peer victimization, what it means, what we can do about it, understand what's happening here in Utah, and then understand what some of the next steps might be, what we can do as community leaders, as parents, as neighbors to try to help some of the kids who are involved in peer victimization. So I'm going to start with my personal story. When I was about 13 years old, I went to school in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had a great group of friends. We would sit together on the bus. We were on the same swim team. And I also had my middle school boyfriend, however we wanted to define boyfriend at that age. And we were close friends too. After a couple of months, he broke up with me, started dating my best friend. But then something a little bit weird happened. In addition to me being a little bummed about that, my friends all sort of started acting weird too. Nobody was sitting with me on the bus. Everyone was sort of, sitting together and alone at our swim team practices. There were some rumors spread about me. Some of them were sexual in nature, which was, pretty disturbing to me at the time. And I realized that this situation was a little bit bigger than me. I tell this story, even though it's kind of embarrassing at this point in my life, because we all have stories like this. We all remember when we were bullied. We all remember when if we had a child or a sibling or a friend who was bullied and what that felt like. And even though the reason for it may not be something that we as adults consider to be very important or very meaningful, when you're a kid, when your peer group is so important to you, when those friendships are so important to you and part of your identity development and who you are as a person, it can be really impactful to have those experiences. So I always put my experience out there, even though it's a little bit embarrassing to share, so we can remember what it's like to be adolescents and remember that feeling. So I want to start with some peer victimization basics. Now that I've moved away from my story, as a researcher, I can better understand some of the things that were going on among those youth, why my peers may have been moving away from me, maybe why I wasn't getting that same social support or friendship that I had before. From there, we're going to talk about defenders specifically, sometimes called upstanders, those individuals who stand up for other people who are being victimized. Then we'll talk about the effects of defenders, and I'll talk about some of my research looking at when defenders engage in that defending to stand up for somebody who's victimized, what kind of impact they can have and how it affects them themselves. And then I want to end by giving you all some tips, what you can do. Some of these things are pretty simple, so that you have some ideas for what you can do moving forward. So let's start with some peer victimization basics. You've noticed that I'm using the term peer victimization and not bullying, right? Even though that's the term we typically use. Researchers typically use the term peer victimization as an umbrella term to talk about lots of different behaviors that individuals might use against somebody else. When we talk about bullying, we're talking about a more specific type of peer victimization, where there are individuals who are engaging in aggression toward others repeatedly, and there tends to be what we refer to as a power imbalance between the aggressor and the victim, and that the aggressor might be physically larger, they might be more popular, in some way they have a little bit more ability to aggress against that other individual. It makes it really hard for that victim to be able to stand up for themselves and fight back. When we talk about peer victimization or bullying, there's lots of different forms of this behavior. There are physically violent acts, and this might be what we think of when we think of stereotypical bullies. So pushing, hitting, kicking, things like that. There are also verbal assaults. This can include name-calling, teasing. As I start doing more of this research, I've started to sort of look at racial slurs and things, and anti-LGBTQ slurs and things like that as verbal assaults, even though they might also be considered discrimination because they are also forms of victimization. And also social aggression. So social aggression, or relational aggression, as some researchers call it, is that what we think of as stereotypical mean girl behavior, where there's maybe some ignoring people on purpose, leaving them out, backstabbing, eye-rolling, trying to manipulate social relationships. But one thing I'll mention is that a lot of the research shows that although boys tend to be more physically violent, if we're just looking at boys and girls, girls and boys do actually tend to be socially aggressive to a similar degree. So we don't want to pretend that these behaviors are not occurring among boys. And the reason we care about peer victimization and bullying is because it has the potential to impact youth's social, psychological, and physical well-being. So I'll start with social. Youth who are victimized, sometimes this is a precursor, sometimes this is a consequence, but they also tend to not be as well connected to their peer group. So they might have fewer friends. They might not have as much social support. They might have fewer people that they can rely on if they have a problem or something like that. We also see that kids who are victimized have more psychological problems. They tend to engage in more internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Internalizing behaviors are like depression, anxiety. Externalizing behaviors are those behaviors that are acting out behavior. So they might be engaging in aggression themselves. We also see that there's some physical problems. Obviously, if somebody is the victim of physical assault, that can be damaging. But we also see that people can have headaches, somatic complaints. Those stress responses can be really problematic for kids who are experiencing peer victimization too. And it's not just the victims. Kids who act as aggressors also tend to have some of these problems, and it can follow them into adulthood. So it's important that we identify these behaviors and we try to help kids who are aggressive or being victimized to get along better with their peers in ways that might be a little bit more supportive or socially acceptable. Dealing with conflict in healthy ways, conflict is going to happen, but when it turns into peer victimization and bullying, that's when we might see some negative results. And I also want to mention that bullying happens in existing context. So I'm borrowing this from some other researchers, but I really like the way that they put the bullying situation in all of these other spheres of influence. So we know that when kids are in situations where their families might be modeling aggressive behavior, or when there might be some coercion going on in the family, kids might model this behavior. We know when peers are engaged in aggressive behavior. We see friends engaging in similar behaviors. We also see pro-social behavior being contagious this way. So it can work both ways. In schools, when there's more aggression and bullying going on, it's going to affect individuals more. So we can see school-by-school differences in how it's affecting the kids at that school. There can also be community differences. There can also be cultural differences. If we think about our political spheres, that has an effect on how kids are interpreting what's right and wrong and how they should be acting out in school. And there's some interesting, few studies, but some really interesting research looking at that. Another way to think about peer victimization is as a group phenomenon. So when we think about kids in schools, this isn't sort of a natural structure. We're taking a lot of young people and a few adults, and we're putting them together for long periods of time, right? And so kids kind of develop these social structures. We tend to see kids who act as aggressors or bullies who kind of hang out together. And along with them, we see kids who can be identified as assistants or reinforcers. So these are the individuals who may not necessarily be the ringleaders in the bullying situation, but they might be laughing at the bullying, they might be doing nothing to stop it, kind of hanging out with the aggressors, which is sort of sending the message that this behavior is acceptable. We have a group called outsiders. It's a pretty small group, and this group is not well understood, but this group tends to try to not be involved in any way. They see bullying happening, they're just going to walk away. They're not going to talk about it, they're not going to spread the rumors, they're just outside of the problem. We have the victims, who are obviously at the receiving end. And then we have a really interesting group. Again, kind of a small group, but this group of defenders is really important because they do more than just ignore the problem. They see problems occurring in their peer group and they want to do more. And so they stand up to powerful aggressors in some cases, or just comfort victims to ensure that they're doing a little bit better, providing that social support. One thing I want to mention is that as researchers, we use these terms. We might label kids in our research using this type of terminology, but when we're talking about actual kids, I would be very hesitant to do so because kids don't necessarily fit one of these roles only. They might, in certain situations, be aggressive, and in another situation, be victimized. And over time, they might move in and out of these types of roles. And so I think the most important thing is to identify behavior and try to help kids overcome behavior rather than trying to label a kid and deal with the consequences of the behavior that way. So I mentioned these important defenders. What do they do? So defenders are important because they are effective in decreasing peer victimization. There's been what we call some observational research where they actually look at kids using video cameras and recording equipment of what's happening on the playgrounds and in other school situations. When a defender steps in, they're almost always effective in stopping the situation from continuing. So we know it works. We know when we ask kids about defenders that it tends to work. And the reason we need these peers around is because, as I mentioned when I was talking about the difference between peer victimization and bullying, victims can sometimes not defend themselves. They might not have the social status. They might not have friends who can stand up to a powerful aggressor with them. They might not have the physical size or ability to stand up to people. And if we think about our school settings, which I think a lot of you work in, we don't want people to fight back, right? We want to teach people to resolve conflict through means that we deem appropriate, right? So it can take defenders sometimes to intervene and help solve these problems in pro-social ways. Also, sometimes victims can blame themselves. If we think about kids who are, on the receiving end of a lot of harmful behavior from their peers, they might be a little bit more withdrawn, they might be rejected by others in their peer group, they might start to internalize some of this, unfortunately. They might start to blame themselves. And so the problem with this is that they may not want to stand up for themselves. So it's a hard situation, it's a sad situation. And we do know that sometimes victims will blame themselves for their plight and therefore don't stand up for themselves. There's research to show that even if somebody is victimized, if they have at least one defender, they fare better psychosocially, they don't have as many of these internalizing, externalizing problems. They are less victimized overall because somebody's on their side. And they're at less risk than other vulnerable youth who may have no defenders. So we want to ensure that there are pro-social people in the peer ecology who are willing and able to help out when a peer victimization is occurring. And I should mention also, although teachers and other adults are privy to some of the peer victimization that goes on, a lot of it is happening out of their view on purpose so that they can't intervene, right? But other peers are present, and so they can be an important source of support for these victimized youth. So I want to share a little bit of research that I did with my colleague Tinglan Ma and two of her students looking at different correlates of defenders and a little bit more information about defenders. So this information came from something called a meta-analysis, which is when you take lots of different research studies, results, and you put them together so you can make some broader claims across many studies rather than just relying on a single research study. So when we took all of the available studies together from all across the world that looked at the number of defenders in a peer group, we actually found that 43% of students are defenders. This doesn't mean they're a defender every time. It's also what we call a self-report. So there might be some what we call social desirability bias, and people say, yes, of course I stand up for other people, when maybe that's not always the case. But it's still a good indicator that there are a good amount of kids in the peer group who are willing, at least in some situations, to stand up for other kids. And they just need to be empowered a little bit to do so in more situations. We also see that girls defend more than boys, if we're just looking at girls and boys only. The reason we think this is that in our culture, we kind of raise girls to be a little bit more nurturing, to be more empathetic, and so we think that they might also be standing up for other people a little bit more because of this socialization. We see that younger children defend more than older children. We see that people who are victims themselves are also more likely to defend others when they're in those situations. Or less likely, I'm so sorry. Victims are less likely to defend. And you can imagine that because they're sort of putting themselves at risk for victimization, perhaps, if they stand up to a powerful aggressor. People who have more empathy of different kinds, we call it affective or cognitive empathy, and care for others more are more likely to defend. And people who have more self-efficacy to defend are more likely to defend, which is pretty straightforward, right? If they feel like they're able to do this effectively, they're more likely to do it. And this is an interesting one. Defenders tend to morally disengage less. So this is a term that was brought up by Alfred Bandura, who's a psychologist who's done a lot of work on moral disengagement. It is a term used to describe when people are able to sort of step away or rationalize their immoral behavior. So something like, well, you know, I hit him, but he hit me first. Or, you know, I stole something, but no one was going to use it anyway. So you're sort of rationalizing immoral behavior. We see that aggressive kids are pretty good at doing this. They're able to rationalize their immoral behavior, while defenders aren't doing this very much. They are much more likely to engage with their moral thoughts and to act in ways that are in line with their morals. Defenders are also more accepted and popular. And this is important because I was talking about that social ecology, right, where we might have some powerful aggressors who are hard to stand up to. But here we have peers in the peer group who are also well-liked, who also have a lot of friends. And so it might be a little bit easier for them to stand up for victims of peer aggression. And something else I wanted to do in my research is try to understand a little bit more about who these individuals are, not just in terms of individual characteristics, personality characteristics, things like that, but maybe who they are in relation to each other. And so this is a very basic example of what we would call a network in social network analysis. And I was curious to know, are there certain individuals who, because of who they're friends with or who they're connected to, are more likely to defend? So we see that we have Dan and Faye and Jay, they're sort of on the periphery. Kat is friends with Len and Dan. She's connecting some people. Len is connecting people even more because for Kat or Dan to be in relation with Jay or Faye, they have to go through Len, right? And so what I actually found that when I calculated what's called betweenness centrality, how much certain individuals are connecting other individuals in the peer group based on who likes who, that controlling for other factors, people like Len are more likely to defend. And this was one of the first times that we saw as researchers that it's not just these individual characteristics, it's also the position of people in the peer group, right? If they are connected to the right people, they have the potential to be these bridges between people who don't necessarily like each other, but they can serve that role of defender and try to make the school ecology a little bit more peaceful. And the last study I want to show is looking at the effects of defending on defenders themselves. So we hear a lot about being a defender, being an upstander, being more than a bystander, but what are the effects on the defenders themselves? So in this study, we had 336 6th and 7th graders who wanted to participate. It was about half girls and boys. They all identified as boys and girls. And they were about 13 years old at the time of the study. And what we did is we asked them at 2 time points about whether they defend others, if they're victimized, and how much they're liked by others. And we found some interesting results. First, being more liked at time 1 was not related to more defending at time 2. So we thought that the people who maybe were a little bit more liked, had that more social clout, may actually defend others more over time. We didn't find that. We did find that those who were defending others were less victimized themselves. And this is an important thing. This is a benefit to the defenders. They are standing up to people who tend to have a little bit more power in the peer group, and we see that they themselves are less victimized as a result of doing this. And then we saw something we didn't expect to find. We found that over time, the youth who were engaging in defending were less liked by their peers, according to peer reports of who they like in the school. And so in conclusion, there is a benefit of defending found in this study, that the defenders might be less victimized, but they also might be a little less liked. They might be putting themselves in harm's way socially by standing up to powerful aggressors. And so I like to make this point because it seems like a great idea to always defend, and we want to tell all kids to do this, but I think we also really need to be thoughtful about, are there kids who are able to do this? Are there kids with certain personalities who we think would be great at, keeping watch on things, so understanding what's going on in the peer group and reporting some of this behavior. And I'll get into a little bit of this later on, but also there's lots of ways that defenders can act as defenders. It doesn't necessarily mean jumping in the middle of a fight. It doesn't necessarily mean confronting someone and telling them not to spread that rumor. That might seem too scary or risky to a kid, but there's lots of things they could do, like get some friends to come help them and do it together. Or tell an adult or an authority figure if that victim isn't willing to do that themselves. They could even do it anonymously. A lot of schools have that ability to, leave a tip or something like that so that that kid can get help. They can walk with a kid between classes so that they're not alone and vulnerable. They could send a text saying, I'm on your side, that wasn't right, just to let them know that they have that peer support. So there's lots of options for defending that are not necessarily jumping in the middle of things, that are also shown to be beneficial. So now it's coming to the end, a little bit more of what you can do, what kids can do, what we can encourage others to do to help this problem of peer victimization. And I'm going to start with what not to do, because sometimes this is a little bit easier. So one thing I want to mention is if there's a situation coming, it can be really helpful to use a mediator in the situation if it's something happening in a school, going through the administration or a school counselor, if it's something happening in some outside of school organization, having some adults present who are sort of neutral. And this is because, parents are protective of their kids. And as I mentioned before, there are people who might be aggressive in certain situations and more victimized in certain situations. So we want to make sure that problems get resolved, but it may not be the best situation to have kids or parents confront each other directly without having somebody more neutral who can help facilitate those conversations. We don't want to tease a kid. We don't want to ignore it. We don't want to downplay it. I mentioned my story before, and I don't know how any of you felt. I felt very self-conscious telling that story because it doesn't seem like a big deal as an adult for somebody's middle school fling to be something that I'm still talking about. But when we're talking about adolescence, these things really matter. Not having anyone to sit with and feeling socially isolated really matters, especially during this developmental period. And so we want to make sure that first and foremost, we are listening, we are taking their stories seriously, we're helping them problem solve, and we're letting them know that, we're going to be there for them when we can listen to them and help them problem solve. And we don't want to try to justify why an individual was victimized or bullied, right? So, there might be a pretty obvious reason. Maybe somebody is being victimized because of their body size. Does that mean that somebody should change their body size so that they're not victimized? Of course not. Doesn't matter what somebody looks like, doesn't matter what somebody's background is, we don't want anyone to be victimized. And therefore, it's important that we change the bullying behavior. We don't try to change the way that somebody is expressing themselves or what they look like, or what they're doing. We might try to arm kids with better social skills so that they're not victimized. Maybe, how to make some friends or how to get along in social situations a little bit better. But we're not going to tell a kid, well, if you didn't wear that, you wouldn't get bullied. Because we want to be able to meet kids where they are and lift them up from where they are. So what can we do? We can look for signs that somebody might be victimized. And I know these are a little bit vague, but there's research to show that a lot of kids do not tell adults, either parents or their teachers, about their victimization. Sometimes because they think it's going to get worse. kids actually report that sometimes it gets worse. And so adults can kind of look for these things on their own. So being withdrawn, maybe being a little bit checked out can be a sign that something is going on. Not necessarily victimization, but really anything. It's always good to check on a kid if they're not quite acting like themselves. Not wanting to go to school. People might talk about things that are not bullying related as reasons to not want to go to school, but it can be a sign that something is going on at school that's not great for that kid. Somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, things like that. These could be complaints that kids are using so that they don't have to go to school and be in that victimization situation, but also that stress could also be leading to things like stomach aches and headaches and other somatic problems. So if a child's going to the doctor frequently, there's not really any reason for this occurring, have those conversations. Is anything else going on at school? Like, what's going on with your friends? What's going on online? Things like that. And another thing that we can do is let children know that we are aware of both the obvious and subtle forms of bullying and that we disapprove. And that includes addressing victimization consistently and every time it occurs. Whether it's kids in the situation or adults in the situation, if peer victimization, discrimination, harassment, all these different things that are sort of entangled are occurring, and people around do nothing, it sends the message that this behavior is okay. So it's important that adults and youth consistently try to stop this behavior from occurring and continuing. We also want to teach children a code of conduct for electronic communication. In addition to doing peer relations research, a lot of the work that I've done has been sort of on tech and kids. And I'm of the mindset that technology is not going anywhere, right? We have it. We have to learn how to use it appropriately. And so from early on, if parents can talk to kids about appropriate and inappropriate behavior online, even from when they're little kids, this can be really helpful. We also, there's a lot of researchers who encourage parents to be on the same social networking sites that their kids are using, be friends with them, understand the nature of communication on these sites, understand what aggression and victimization looks like on these sites, so that they can have these important conversations with their kids. And last, I already mentioned this once, but listen, empathize, and problem solve. Kids report that when somebody listens to them and takes them seriously, it can be really helpful. And as adults, we can help them role play, think about solutions, think about people they can talk to try to make it better, so that they can have some resources to help them through a difficult time. And I already sort of mentioned that one. Another thing that we can do is try to harness children's distaste for aggression and their empathy for victims. So, we as adults model this behavior. Rather than putting people down, we can talk about lifting people up. If somebody's being left out or somebody doesn't have the same opportunities, what can we do to include them and lift them up rather than people being left out? And we can model this behavior for young people and encourage them to engage in this behavior. And now I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Utah specifically. So there is data that's collected annually, biannually I think, about all different sorts of school safety and mental health problems that might be occurring among kids in Utah schools. So bullying's a problem. We know it is. Kids are reporting it's happening. And when we ask kids why it's happening, what we see from these large descriptive data sets is that kids are reporting that bullying is occurring for a lot of the same reasons that we see cross-nationally. Very commonly, it's because of things like what people look like, being unpopular. And then we see smaller percentages of people reporting things like because of my race or ethnicity, because of my background or nationality, because my sexual or gender identity. But we have to be really careful when we're looking at some of these statistics because we're asking every kid at the school, are you experiencing victimization, and if so, why? If we have a school that has very few kids who identify as racial and ethnic minorities, we're going to have a very small percentage of kids who report this is why it's happening. But if we were to ask only the kids who identify as racial and ethnic minorities, maybe we'd see something a little bit different. And that's something that I'm very interested in learning more about in regard to race and ethnicity, but also gender and sexuality, disability, and some of these other identity-related variables, because Utah's a unique place. We're pretty homogenous in a lot of ways. And some schools are really diverse. Some schools really aren't, depending on what part of the state we're in. And I'm really curious how these different identity characteristics are related to kids' experiences, and if the demographic makeup of their school have something to do with it. We've heard a lot in the news about the fact that there is racial and ethnic discrimination occurring. We also know that there is a lot of anti-LGBTQ hate going on. There was a story in the Salt Lake Tribune recently about hate crimes being up against adults who identify as LGBTQ. The statistics reported by youth who identify as LGBTQ in Utah are pretty shocking. There's an organization called GLSEN, it's glsen.org, if anyone's interested in learning more about it. They collect data in a little bit of a different way than the state of Utah does. They reach out just to LGBTQ youth specifically and ask them about their experiences in school. And they have a report that comes out by state. Over 90% of kids have heard people use an anti-LGBTQ slur in their classrooms. We know that kids are victimized verbally, physically, in some cases they're threatened. And they also ask them to report on the types of things that are happening in their schools that might be protective or not protective. We ask them, I think one of the questions is, are there more than 6 adults at your school who you feel like you can be comfortable with and be out with? Things like that. Are there policies in your school that specifically protect kids against, bullying and LGBTQ specific bullying? And what we find is that the statistics are not really where we want them to be. We see a lot of kids who are at risk and a lot of kids who are talking about a lot of problems that are occurring. And so I think that in Utah we need to be aware that there are people who are victimized and bullied because of things like what I went through, which really had nothing to do with my identity, but there are a lot of kids who are also experiencing this identity-specific bullying and victimization. And I think it's imperative that we as adults understand that teachers and schools and administrators can be a source of support for kids, because we know that kids who may be marginalized are at higher risk for victimization. And related to this, there isn't a whole lot of Utah-specific bullying and victimization research occurring right now. And so I want to invite any of you who have any connections who are interested in learning more about bullying and victimization in your schools. I'd be happy to work with you, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about it and kind of find out what solutions we can put in place to try to help some of these kids. I want to thank you so much for being here and learning a little bit more about peer victimization. And I wanted to thank some of my funders who've helped with this research. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
So this is going to be an open forum for questions. So we have some that were submitted. However, just raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll be happy to engage everyone in the discussion.
If you have data or insights on that, when there have been significant differences in schools where more victimization was, I'm just curious as to what factors, why.
Sure.
It just makes me wonder.
So I'll repeat the question too, so all of you can hear it well too. So why do we see more victimization and bullying in some schools versus others? And human research is always complicated because there's so many factors. One of the things that is seen time and again is something that we refer to as school climate. Is this a place where people feel a sense of belonging? Is this a place where youth have connections to their peers? Is this a place where people want to go to school and where they feel like their teachers want them to succeed and their peers want to hang out with them? When there is a positive school climate and people are excited about their school and they feel that sense of connection to their school, there tends to be a lot less victimization and bullying versus in schools that have a more negative climate.
There we go. I don't know if this is something that you would know about, but just on that note, what are some things that you've noticed improve, the climate of a school versus a bad climate?
Sure, and I'm going to use a personal anecdote about a school that I visited that I felt was really doing things well. And I've talked to some kids who go to that school, and of course there's still problems. We're never going to have a completely problem-free school. But there's a school in Cache County nearby where I live, and the principal there really feels like students can't learn, they cannot focus on academics if their social and emotional well-being isn't being addressed. And so he takes that very seriously. He ensures that all the kids feel like they have a couple of teachers and adults in the school that they can connect with. They'll actually like ask teachers and students like, who are your people? And if they don't have people, he makes sure they get people. He does a lot of activities just to let the kids introduce themselves to each other on closed circuit or different, ways of building community in the school. And I don't know the details of everything that he does, but it's all about building a school community and taking the time and resources to really do that. And the academics are great at that school. I don't know if that's just by chance or if his approach is really working. That's the kind of stuff I would love to study, but I think that ensuring that those human connections are there is really important.
I'm Mohsen Ghaffari. I teach 5th grade here in Salt Lake District. I have a question and a commentary. Commentary first. We do very, very little as far as human development. You guys are all very aware of human development and how important it is. And at schools, we spend very little time doing it. Question for you is, how do you go to the different districts or the legislature and try to advocate for more human development in schools and especially elementary schools? And the other question is, I was shocked to hear that 43% of students are defenders. I think that I always thought there were very, very few of them. Are there ways to develop defenders at schools?
Thank you for your question. So in answer to your first question, I think this is the perfect opportunity. We have some of the people sitting in the room today who have the ability to try to make change. And I think that, hearing from teachers that maybe a little bit of focus on this social emotional learning could be important. But I also recognize teachers do a lot. You all have really high expectations already, and it takes time and resources and training to be able to give teachers the tools to teach a whole other set of skills. So I think that it's important that we support teachers to be able to develop these skills and not just put another thing on top of them. But I'd also love to hear from other people if they have ideas about that. Do you want to make a comment?
I do, because I'm a teacher as well. I teach at an alternative high school. And it's to the point now that I feel like I don't even have enough. I have my master's in education, but I don't have enough of those skills to teach. So I'm actually going back to get my MSW.
Oh, wow.
Just so I can interweave curriculum with life with all this other stuff, because it's just not there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not trained to do it. There's so many issues that it's like normal teachers don't have that skill set.
Thank you. And I'll mention, I collected some data from schools, or from teachers mostly in the Ogden area, and then there was a handful of teachers from other areas. And the reason I didn't share this data is because it's not a great sample from a researcher's point of view, and that I don't think it's necessarily representative. I think the teachers who really care a lot are probably the ones who answered. But in that data too, I saw a lot of teachers saying they didn't feel like they necessarily have the skills and training to address these sorts of problems in their schools. Mm-hmm.
This is not just a comment, it's a reality. It's bullying and discrimination, not just among the students, it's among the teachers too. And I have felt it, I am sure about it. And if you don't work around the staff, let's say, of the school, what can you expect for the students?
I think that's a really great comment, and it's actually something that I've wanted to collect some data on as well, is the school climate from the perceptions of the teachers. If teachers don't feel like they have somebody to go to and they don't feel like they belong at their school and they don't feel like they have the social support of their fellow teachers, how can we expect the students to have the same? And so that's part of that school climate that people are assessing to learn more about this, and I honestly don't know if we know that much about it, except that when teachers feel more connected to their school, things tend to be better too. So I think that's a great comment. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering about the effect of home on school. So if a student goes to school and that's a safe place, they have a place there, how much happens to erase that when they go home? If their home isn't a good place for them.
Yeah.
Or if there are things at home actually pushing them into, and that's not the right word probably, but developing them, their bullying behaviors.
And this, I don't know if I have a great answer because this isn't exactly what I look at, but from what my understanding, if things are really bad in one context, but there is another context that's really strong and supportive, it can have a buffering effect. It doesn't mean that kids aren't going to have problems, but from what I understand, that's what the research would suggest. And then, sorry, I missed you all back there.
Hello, okay, there you go. Thank you. I first want to say thank you for your presentation. I truly enjoyed it. This is an issue I've been working on. After the death of little Izzy, I got involved and been working with her mom on trying to look at legislation. I passed the Izzy bill this past session. Was quite surprised to learn that there was no data being collected on the person being bullied, but only the person who's doing the bullying. And so that's part of what my bill do, is to collect that piece of the data so we can start looking at it and then make decisions based on that. And I want to say I agree with this woman right here when she said that, you know, we have real big issues, because as I've started working on this issue, I've been receiving phone calls from all over Utah, and we have teachers who are being bullied by other teachers. We're having students bullying each other. We have parents bullying other parents. And so it's not surprising to me that our kids are bullying, because we have adults who won't behave in front of the young people. And I guess my question to you is, in your research, as I continue to work on this as a legislator, what are some policy changes you see that may need to happen to make a change in the state around bullying?
Thank you so much for your question. I think that, I'm a researcher, so I think that data is a great place to start, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Any discriminatory acts that are occurring in schools are civil rights violations. They should be recorded by schools when they are occurring. That doesn't mean it's necessarily happening. So I think enforcing some of the policies that already exist is important. Another thing is that there's research to show that when there are enumerated anti-bullying policies at the school level, at the state level, and what I mean by that is saying, you can't bully people because of what they look like, you can't bully people because of their religion, you can't bully people because of their race and ethnicity. When you're very explicit about that and use these enumerated policies, that is associated with less victimization. And I don't believe Utah has that currently, if I'm remembering correctly. That information is on stopbullying.gov, which is the government website, and has information about the different things that are in place for each state in the country. So I think that that's really important. And I think that all schools are supposed to have anti-bullying policies in place as well. They're going to be enforced to different degrees. And I think that, ensuring that schools are taking these things seriously and following through on the policies that are in place can be really helpful.
So I don't know if you answered this and I just missed it, but kind of going off of the personal development study in school, I've been personally learning a lot about projection and how, the way that we treat others is usually the way that we feel about ourselves. So, a lot of bullying comes, I think, from people rejecting parts of themselves that they don't like. And so then they project that on treating other people badly. What are some things that we can do, to kind of encourage children either in our home and also in our schools to accept themselves better and to love themselves better?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there are kids who engage in aggression in sort of a reactive way. They interpret the world as a little bit hostile, and when bad things happen to them, they react to that in ways that are sometimes aggressive. There's other kids who engage in aggressive in what we call a proactive way. There's something they maybe want, popularity, to hang out in certain friend groups, things like that, is they might engage in aggression for those behaviors. And so I think that the way that we would intervene or try to help kids in those situations is different. I think in the reactive situation, sort of what you're talking about, that kids might not know how to deal with emotions, not know how to deal with rejection, not know how to deal with conflict, they might be acting out in ways that are harmful because things aren't going right for them. And I think that that's a perfect opportunity when we can have school counselors and other adults in somebody's life try to intervene and help them develop some of those coping skills and conflict resolution skills. How do I deal with somebody, doing something I didn't like, or maybe being aggressive toward me in a way that can be, beneficial to everybody rather than continuing a cycle of aggression. There was somebody in the back, yes.
My question has to do with any research out there on the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness on developing defender behavior in schools or in other social situations. Has it been tried?
It's a good question. As far as I know, a lot of the interventions that involve having defenders, it's part of a larger intervention. And so when people try to break apart those components, it does seem like having more defenders is beneficial. I don't know that we know that much about, if all we do is just develop more defenders, is that going to happen necessarily? And one of my concerns, as I mentioned, is that if we encourage kids who are at risk for victimization, maybe kids who aren't well connected or maybe are a little bit more reserved, are we putting them in harm's way? And so I would love to see interventions that target specific kids. I remember, like when I was younger, we would have school safety patrol. There were kids who made sure kids were, these are pro-social kids. They're well connected, they're well liked. They have good relationships with other people. They have good relationships with teachers and might be able to share some of that information. So I think that those sorts of interventions would be really beneficial. But the interventions that do involve a defender component are able to increase the amount of defending happening. So that does seem to be effective. Thank you all for directing me. It's helpful.
There was a part in your research that I thought was really important where you did the longitudinal piece, and at time 1, the defender behavior kind of showed in time 2 that they were less liked. And I kind of feel like that's an important thing to understand, especially since that developmentally, like you showed at the beginning, where your peer group is so important. So I'm guessing that this probably leads to a decrease in defender behavior if that's the result that happens. So I'm wondering, like, what do you make of that? Like, why do you think this is happening? What do we do? How do we work with that information?
Yeah, it's tricky because this is a single study, and so I'm always nervous to make, big conclusions from a single study. I think we need to see if this is happening in other data sets, in other contexts, and to also have that third wave of data to say, okay, now they're less like what's happening next. But what I think is probably happening here is that usually people who are aggressive in the peer group know they're going to be pretty successful. They tend to be a little bit more popular and more liked. And I think if you stand up to a powerful aggressor who doesn't want to be told not to be aggressive anymore, that's probably not going to go so well. And those individuals may be victimized also. So that's why I talk about it. It's a tricky situation. I don't think that the answer necessarily is to tell everyone to go defend. I think the answer is to try to have certain individuals who may feel that self-efficacy to defend, to do that, and other people to just be supportive and pro-social and not encourage the aggressive behavior. Maybe be the one to walk away. Maybe be the one to drop an anonymous tip in a box. So to maybe defend in those more subtle ways that don't necessarily put people at risk.
So I'm going to be moving to a private facility, but I have been teaching at a public middle school in Riverton. And I'm not going to suggest that our school has it all solved, because we still solve plenty of these issues. But one thing I think that ties in with some of the things said that I do feel like has been effective. We have a substantial number of student leadership and service groups. And I was the advisor for one of them and encouraged even collaboration between the groups, and kind of turning them on to this topic, I think, has been effective. Because we also have social and emotional learning lessons and things like that, but I do think the effect of having peers work with other students on this topic has tended to be way more effective than anything even I as a teacher can say, about bullying and stuff like that. So, I know there are a bunch of teachers in the room, and if student leadership groups aren't a thing at your school, I would really, really encourage looking into doing that, because I think it makes a world of difference.
Thank you so much for sharing this, and I'm so glad to see kids and teachers in the room, because you all are the ones who are in there. I'm researching about it, but you know what it's like day to day. There is some theoretical papers. They haven't done a lot of research on this, but it's in line with what you're saying. I'm talking about kids wanting power, wanting to be popular, wanting to be well-liked and recognized in the peer group. And the theoretical idea is, can we give kids pro-social ways of having power and status? Can they be leaders? Can they teach their peers other things? And so I would love to, I think those sorts of programs are so great, and I love that you're able to say, yes, we're having fewer problems at our school because of this, because it seems theoretically as if it would work to give kids power in different ways.
Okay, just a quick question. You mentioned social aggressions, and then you also mentioned belonging at a school being like an eliminator or lessening bullying. How do you teach, because I've always heard people that are in the clique don't think there's a clique. So how do you teach adults and kids the difference between belonging and cliquing?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And this is tricky, because I mean, one of the things that happens when youth are this age, it's developmentally appropriate for them to sort of have these really close, intense friendship groups. It's sort of part of what they're doing as they explore their identities and become young adults. But I think that, sharing the idea of inclusivity, that with little kids, I've heard the expression like, we don't say, we don't play. To make sure that everybody's sort of invited to the table, even if it's more of a cliquey situation. And in terms of relational aggression, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's something that can happen within cliques too, because a lot of relational aggression happens within friendships and within cliques, which is why just because you have a sense of belonging in your clique doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be safe from these problems. Is that a lot of people who use relational aggression are trying to solve conflict in more socially appropriate ways than the hitting and kicking and hair pulling we might have seen as, in early elementary school kids. So they're becoming more socially savvy, right? You have to have social skill to be able to spread rumors effectively, as unfortunate as that is. And so a lot of interventionists will say we need to teach kids who are in these situations how to resolve conflict directly, how to talk about, you slighted me in this way and I didn't like it, and this is how I think we can go about fixing this problem, rather than trying to resort to these more covert behaviors.
I'll speak up real loud. Thank you. Having been, and I'll talk on my personal side, not my business side, but having been a parent of 2 children that were violently assaulted at school, and did go to those trusted adults within the school system, and working with the school, the answer for one of them was to move the one child to a different school, or out of the classroom, as the victim. The other one was to pull that whole group together and expel all of them, or suspend all of them for 2 days. And in that situation, my son did not feel like he could defend himself, because he knew that even though there's policies, they would not enforce them. And so he did not defend himself in a camera at a school and was suspended for 2 days. So my question to this is that it's starting to get real frustrating walking through our school systems and seeing anti-bullying, putting our kids all the way through anti-bullying school system curriculum, and then not dealing with it at the bottom grassroots level when it happens, and then having that victim really not supported. So the thing that I am working on is trying to resolve that problem, and I end up getting them after they're victims that don't want to be victims anymore. And so to me, I would love to find out some more information on how to fix that problem once they are there and trying to fix it.
So and I have to say, I'm a researcher, not an interventionist, so this is from what I've been reading, not from the research that I do myself. But one thing that I've read a few different times is that the zero tolerance policies for violence can sometimes sort of backfire. We don't want kids to be acting out in aggressive ways at schools. But as I was mentioning before, if somebody fights back, if they're in a physical aggression situation, sometimes it's like, you're out of here, without really getting to the root of the problem, which is, this interpersonal situation. And so I don't know that I have a solution to that, unfortunately. I just know that from what I've read, it's that we need to address these problems in mediational contexts and in social justice oriented contexts, where we can have people really talk about what was done to them, what could be done to repair the damages, rather than kids just getting expelled in a blanket way.
And if there's anyone in the room that works with the school level and policies being reinforced and what policies are actually there, I'd really like to talk to you.
Last question.
I was really interested in your social network research and defenders well connected. Was there any analysis beyond that that your research team did that derived any other information from those social network analysis? And what? And then you had mentioned this before, but was on one end less likely to have victimization, on the other end of that social network more likely, or was that part of the analysis at all?
I believe in this study, this is why I tripped up on my words earlier, is that we actually found that the youth who were defending were victimized more when we were looking at it within one time point. That was sort of the end of that study, but I'm willing to share some results from some colleagues in the Netherlands research, because they do a lot of social network analysis, because they tend to be able to collect data from large amounts of kids, which is sometimes what it takes to do this type of research. What they find is that, from a network perspective, is that the relationships between kids really matter. And this is why I always go back to the social ecology of these relationships. So victims who share a bully tend to defend each other, right? Bullies who share victims tend to stand up for each other and kind of work together. So we can't pretend that any of these, this is not exactly answering your question, but I hope it's sort of getting to it. We can't look at these peer victimization situations in isolation. There tend to be these power structures, unfortunately, among youth, and the friendships, the relationships that people have with each other in the group is going to impact whether people defend, whether people are aggressive, whether people stand up for each other.
Let's all thank Dr. Meter for her excellent presentation. I realize that many of you probably have additional questions, so Dr. Meter is going to be around for a few minutes yet if you have additional questions and would like to follow up. Otherwise, I would just like to gather my notes here so I get the date right. So this is, as we said, the first opportunity we've had to meet in person for Blue Plate Research, this series that focuses on the health and well-being of the citizens of Utah. We hope you can join us again. Our next scheduled event is on September 9th, where Professor Gregory Madden will share his research on impulsive decision-making, which is important, as we all know, for youth and adults and in various aspects of our lives. I will mention that Dr. Madden was last year recognized as the top researcher at Utah State University, being the recipient of our D. Wynn Thorne Award. So again, September 9th, please join us. Additionally, this is a series that we always want to work to improve. And so on your table is a card asking for some feedback. If you could take just a couple of minutes and provide us with some feedback, that would help us refine it to make it even better for you in the future. And again, I would like to personally thank Dr. Meter. Assistant professors are very busy people, and I just really appreciate her taking the time to talk with us about this very important topic today. And again, encourage you to ask additional questions. And with that, thank you all for being here. Thank you again to Regents, our co-sponsor, and we look forward to seeing you in